Good evening, everybody. It's great to see you tonight. Thanks for being here as we join together for this time of Bible study. In this Wednesday night class, we're studying a series of lessons that were prepared by Bill Hall, and they're entitled Major Tests of Our Faith. Things that can really challenge us, things that can be hard to deal with, things that have, unfortunately, caused people to give up and to lose their faith and so forth. I think we've talked about a number of important things. Tonight's lesson is about persecution. And I would argue that persecution certainly is something that tries our faith, tests our faith. But I got to say, I actually think that we are sort of living in a tub of butter. We've had it made pretty well. We have not been seriously tested by persecution. Now, I think when we'll talk about it in the course of our lesson, I think there are some things that you could call persecution that we're called upon to deal with. But man, not like those who've gone before us. Especially in this time, in this immediate time. I was thinking just the other day, my parents' generation lived through World War II. My grandparents' generation lived through World War I, and in between there, they dealt with the Great Depression. A little over a generation before my grandparents was the Civil War and all the hardships that brought on. We have not dealt with anything like that. Even just from a physical perspective, we've had it really easy. We've been super blessed. And I really think in regards to persecutions for our faith, have been pretty minor. Now we'll talk about some things that we could legitimately label as persecution, but the fact of the matter is we've had it easy. We've had it really easy compared to those who have gone before us and compared to a lot of people who are living in the world today in various places where they don't have the kind of freedoms that we have. And so persecution is something that we haven't got a tremendous amount of experience with. And that's what kind of worries me, that if and when it does come, will we be ready and will we stand the test? Because it is a major test of faith. And so we want to talk about persecution tonight. Our author takes us to Hebrews 10 to start out. Let's look at Hebrews chapter 10. Beginning at verse 32. Hebrews 10:32, the Hebrew writer says, "Call to remembrance the former days in which after ye were illuminated, ye endured a great fight of afflictions, partly whilst ye were made a gazing stock, both by reproaches and afflictions, and partly whilst ye became companions of them that were so used. For ye had compassion of me and my bonds, and took joyfully the spoiling of your goods, knowing in yourselves that ye have in heaven a better and an enduring substance." So Arthur said list some of the things they dealt with, but I would just concentrate there on verse 32, where it says that they endured a great fight of afflictions. And so, as we were just mentioning, we haven't been harshly or seriously challenged. Like certainly nothing that we have had to deal with you could call a great fight of afflictions. They had that. They were made a gazing stock. In other words, there was a purposeful intention to make them look bad. And they suffered reproaches and afflictions. They were companions with others who suffered such things. But I thought it was particularly interesting there in verse 34. They took joyfully the spoiling of their goods. And so you have to believe that what he's talking about there is that because of the things they suffered, they either had to flee and abandon their properties, or they had to, maybe their properties were confiscated from them. I don't know. I don't know how that would have been. But one way or the other, they suffered the spoiling of their goods or their physical possessions. And so these Christians had been through a lot. And notice he says, you had compassion, the Hebrew writer, and I personally think that this is one of those sections in Hebrews that sure makes it sound like Paul is the author. We don't know that for sure, but whoever it was in bonds, and they had compassion on him during that time that he was in bonds. Whether it was Paul or not, that's the kind of thing they were dealing with. And so their persecutions were intense. But the follow-up question there is, what enabled them to endure these trials? Verse 34, knowing in yourselves that ye have in heaven a better and an enduring substance. The New American Standard Version says a better possession and a lasting one. And so those Christians were able, even in the face of persecution, even when they were having their goods taken from them in one way or the other, the spoiling of their goods, they endured that because they had their eyes set on the goal of heaven. And that's what they were after. They knew that was far better than anything that might cost them here in order to have that. And that's what kept them going. I want to argue that that's true of Christians everywhere and in all ages, and must be true of us too. That good times or bad, whatever comes, we have got to be the kind of people who say, this world is not my home. I'm just passing through, and have that mindset. And they did, and that's what kept them going. Josh?
Well, I looked at verse 30, because kind of before those verses, verse 30 talks about, vengeance belongeth unto me, I will recompense, saith the Lord. So God's going to deal with those that do wrong. And then after it, verses 35 to 39, it's really talking about keeping your faith. Don't be like those, like verse 38. If any man draw back, my soul shall have no pleasure in him. Verse 39, we are not of them who draw back into perdition, but of them that believe to the saving of the soul. So it's kind of, they're dealing with difficulties, and kind of before and afterwards, God's going to take care of those that do wrong. Because this is stuff that we've never dealt with before. So God will handle those that do wrong, and then don't lose your faith because of these things. And I think that's really so important. So I kind of looked at the bigger picture of those.
Yeah. I think you're right. I'd be interested to hear any of you comment about, what do you think? Do you feel somewhat sort of, I don't even know the right word to use. I mean, if and when we get to heaven, and some of these Christians who endured such hard things and stuck it out, and then here we are, we've never been tested. Do you feel like you'll be a little embarrassed or intimidated, to go up into heaven, and there are those saints who had such harsh conditions to deal with, and we haven't? I think about that sometimes, and I wonder how that will be. I think it'll be fine. I think heaven's going to be a perfect place, and I don't think there'll be any bad thing there. But you got to think, we just haven't been tested like that. Thoughts or comments, anybody?
One thought on that. No, I agree 100% with you that we've not dealt with the physical difficulties and things like that. But I think it is fair to say that the devil's on top of his game right now.
Yeah.
And he's really working hard on us. And I think that, we do have a lot to deal with. It may not be.
It's not the physical person. Yeah.
We are getting bombarded daily to fall.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. Satan adjusts his attack to whatever he needs to adjust it to. And so, for instance, he attacks us through our prosperity right now, through covetousness and materialism, because we live in such a rich age. So he uses that too. He's got a whole array of tools, and he can use them all effectively. I don't think he's using the persecution one too much right now, but I think it's on the horizon. I think that there's a chance that in the coming time, maybe not too distant future, he'll pull out this persecution one that he hasn't been using too much lately on us. He's been using, I know Wayne could talk about some of the preachers in Ghana and some of the things that they deal with. Even just recently, there was some news from there that some of the guys who are trying to take firm stands on doctrinal issues are really being, at least verbally attacked. Any thoughts, Wayne?
Yeah, some lives are being destroyed. There's one preacher I know that worked very closely with him last time I was there. And that may be one of the reasons why he was the victim of persecution. But he was lied about. He had a stroke and had to step down from preaching. Another preacher who rejected the teachings that we've been trying to bring said, well, he had an affair with one of the people there and just tried to destroy his life. And the reason he had to step down was because of this affair he had. And
So it was just an outright lie.
yeah, just an outright lie. And we got it and we believed it because, we had no reason to deny it. And it was just, we found out just this week that it was all a lie by a false brother who was rejecting the things that we were teaching, rejecting God's will.
Yeah.
And trying to physically or personally intimidate and attack those who are accepting
Yeah.
the truth.
Yeah.
I stand for the truth, Greg, I stand for the truth. Preaching once homosexuals and stuff like that. I don't know, eventually, I don't know how soon, I don't know how, but I think we're going to be accused of hate speech and we're going to face some kind of government persecution.
Yeah, I think that could be sooner than later. We're right at a really crucial time right now, and I think that this year and the elections this year could determine whether that sort of push is accelerated, or maybe if certain people get elected, maybe they'll pull back from some of that aggressive agenda somewhat. But yeah, I think there's a real potential there.
JD's got Tanner.
Oh, JD, yeah.
Kind of to add to Gordon's point, if we just take a look up north at Canada, people that we would think are pretty similar to us in so many ways, but in their legislature, they have a bill they're considering to possibly make, hate speech, life imprisonment a possibility.
Yeah.
Licensing bureaus up there left and right are taking people's, professional licenses away if they want, go along with the LGBTQ, whatever other letter, agenda. So just north of us, with the people that are pretty similar to us, it's there.
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, and it may not be that far off for us. My big question is, how will we do when we're exposed to a test like that? I'm concerned, but we know that we've got brethren, both historic brethren and brethren currently living in the world in different places who are going through a lot of that. The key, though, I think, is what we said there in verse 34. You got to keep in mind that we have a better and an enduring substance in heaven. We have something better to look forward to. And we just got to keep our eye on the goal no matter what we deal with. Go ahead.
All right, let's move to number 2. So, author wants us to consider 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 9 to 13. All right, so 1 Corinthians 4, verses 9 to 13. All right, 1 Corinthians 4, beginning verse 9. It says, For I think that, if I can talk, for I think that God hath set forth us the apostles last, as it were appointed to death, for we are made a spectacle unto the world, and to angels, and to men. We are fools for Christ's sake, but ye are wise in Christ. We are weak, but ye are strong. Ye are honorable, but we are despised. Even unto this present hour we both hunger and thirst, and are naked, and are buffeted, and have no certain dwelling place, and labor, working with our own hands, being reviled, we bless, being persecuted, we suffer it, being defamed, we entreat. We are made as filth of the world, and are the offscouring of all things unto this day. So, the author says, after reading these verses, give a brief summary of the abuses suffered by the apostles. So pretty good list there for us that Paul gives. He mentions things like being a spectacle to the world, but he says we are fools for Christ's sake, but you are wise, and so he's sort of making the comparisons: strong and weak, honorable, despised. Verse 11 is the one that really stood out to me, because he said, in this present hour we are hungry, thirsty, naked, buffeted, and have no certain dwelling place. Those are just things that we've never had to really deal with before. And so, brief summary of the abuses suffered by the apostles. I think Greg's point is right. I tried to, I was looking at this just thinking, we just really hadn't dealt with things like they've dealt with. But if I had a chance to talk to Paul and he says, what all have you suffered for the cause of Christ? Well, maybe maybe some, but I certainly haven't dealt with the things that he mentions as being dealt with here.
Well, verse 11, hunger and thirst and nakedness, buffeted, no certain dwelling. We haven't dealt with those kind of things.
Not at all.
But you know, I got the idea that some of this abuse that they were suffering was actually coming from some of these brethren.
Yeah.
That even some of their brothers, and maybe that's if you go back at verse 8, now ye are full, ye are rich. Verse 10, we are fools for Christ's sake, but ye are wise. I get the idea that maybe he's dealing with some of the things that these brethren themselves had put upon them, you know. Yeah. And that's a sad thing when the hardship and the abuse comes from brethren.
Right.
Anybody have a thought here, Wayne?
Yeah, just almost all of the persecution in Ghana is by brethren.
Yeah.
That's the main focus of Paul's persecution was Asiatic Jews, his own brethren.
Yeah.
So it's not uncommon.
I know when we were working in Cuba, when we got in trouble with the government, it was because brethren turned us into the government. Brethren who didn't agree with us, but brethren nonetheless. And so it can happen, that's for sure. Other thoughts here, anybody? All right, so again, if you think about the terminology used there, especially in verse 11, we hunger and thirst, are naked and buffeted, and have no certain dwelling place. We labor, working with our own hands. We're reviled, but we bless. We're persecuted, but we suffer it. Defamed, made as the filth of the world, the offscouring of all things. So I don't think that, so somebody might argue that Paul's using hyperbole there. He's just exaggerating for him. I don't think he's exaggerating. I would argue that that's probably very literal.
Yeah, it's all about perspective. We had a guy at work the other day that spoke to us, and he had both of his legs blown off because he stepped on. He was in war. His name's Johnny Jones. He's on Fox News. He was the guy that's supposed to defuse bombs, and so he stepped on one. And his partner was killed, and his legs were blown off. He came to speak to us at work about perspective. One of the things he said was that, if we're stuck in traffic, we're running late to work or something, then the worst issue we have is being in a comfortable car for a little bit longer than we planned. Yeah. And that really stuck with me. It's all about perspective. Our perspective it's been so easy to be a Christian, even with the things that we're dealing with. I think it's relatively easy. But for Paul, if I was in Paul's shoes and I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I've got no clothes, I've got no place to live, because of my work for the cause of Christ, from a worldly perspective, it's like, you're crazy. Why are you going to keep doing that? Yeah. But to your point, back to the last question. Well, we're working toward eternal things, not just things here. We should be. So it's all about perspective.
I think you're right. Karen?
I like the wording of the New American Standard Version in verse 13. It says, we have become as the scum of the world that dregs of all things. That's pretty strong.
Pretty strong language.
Really strong. Yeah, I think you're right. All right, let's look at another text. John 15. John 15, beginning at verse 18. John 15, 18, if the world hates you, ye know that it hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love his own. But because you're not of the world, but I have chosen you out of the world, therefore the world hateth you. Remember the word that I said unto you, the servant is not greater than his Lord. If they have persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they have kept my saying, they will keep yours also. But all these things they will do unto you for my name's sake, because they know not him that sent me. So the reason why Jesus said you should expect this sort of thing is because you're coming you have opposing purposes. You have opposing priorities. We, who are trying to serve the Lord and be like him, are being opposed from people who hate him. And Jesus said, they hated me, they're going to hate you. And he said, the servant is not above his master. If they persecuted me, they'll persecute you. So, Jesus, first of all, is saying, expect it and don't be shocked when it comes. It's coming. And he says, really, I think the way I would summarize that, he says, the reason why you'll be persecuted is because you approach life from a totally different set of priorities. And the people who don't see things the way we do, who don't appreciate the values that we have, I think they hate us because it sort of exposes them. When we try to live right and they're not, they hate the comparison, the contrast that is brought out, and so they lash out in response to that. But again, a couple things there I think in that reading is that Jesus said, you can expect it. If they hated me and persecuted me, they're going to hate you and persecute you. And the reason being is because of a whole different set of priorities.
Yeah, I think verse 21, I mean, they don't know God. All these things they will do unto you for my name's sake, because they know not him that sent me. I mean, the world doesn't know God and doesn't care about the things of God, and so because of that, they're just naturally going to be at odds, you know. And then here they are trying to stand up for the things of God. Well, they don't care about that stuff, and so you're viewed as the enemy, and I think that's true today, you know, to some degree. There's worldly people don't care about God, and so just like the apostles, I mean, if we're trying to do things like God would have us to do, we're going to be at odds with them. We're going to stand out. They're going to think we're religious weirdos and we're not politically correct and all those kind of things. And that just really stood out to me. They just don't know God. People are just debased and don't know God.
Yeah. Anybody have a thought?
If you don't mind indulging me for a moment, just briefly, I was raised Catholic, and as a lot of people do when they get about 18 years old, they fall away. It's true in our Church of Christ as well. That happens. I was in the military, and I worked my way through the ranks and was a platoon sergeant, and I had this young soldier under me who I don't know at the time because I wasn't that savvy on yet, but he probably was a member of the Church of Christ because he was happy and gung-ho and just, never upset about anything, and he was just always, I need to go to church on Wednesday night. And I did everything I could to keep him from going.
Yeah.
Because he just grinded my gears. He was so happy. And I feel bad about it now.
Yeah.
But, a lot of water under the bridge since then. But I kind of see it from the other side.
Yeah.
Because I've lived it from the other side. And
Well, would you argue that at that time that part of what was annoying you was this pretty distinct contrast between that guy and yourself?
He stood out so much from everybody else.
Yeah.
And it was because of his just positive outlook, and nothing could get him upset. And, here we are doing all these terrible things, and he just...
I think that's what Jesus is talking about here in this context. They hated me, they'll hate you. Yeah, I think that's good. Good example.
Yeah.
Anybody else? All right. So, number 4, Josh.
Okay, number 4. It says the Bible is full of examples of severe persecution. List 3 or 4 that stand out in your mind. All right, so be thinking about examples of persecution. I'll give you one. I was thinking about Acts chapter 12. James was put to death. You remember in Acts chapter 12, and Peter would have also been killed, but an angel came and miraculously rescued him. But that was an example of severe persecution. James put to death. Peter would have been killed. Anybody else have any? Wait.
So it's not recorded in the Bible, but through legend, Isaiah would have been one of these people that he mentions in Hebrew. It's the Psalm 2.
Sawn asunder, I think that's right.
Yeah.
That's what tradition says happened to us. Like you said, it's not in the Bible, but traditionally the argument is that he was probably one of the ones the Hebrew writer was talking about when it says sawn asunder. Can you imagine that? But I mean, if it was Isaiah or not, it was somebody who was living for the Lord who got sawn in half. It's hard to imagine.
Yeah. Anybody else? Severe persecution.
And Stephen,
Yeah.
he was preaching to the Jews, we kind of mentioned that in high school, so,
Yeah.
that said, you always persecute the prophets and those that are sent to you, and even kill.
Yeah, right after Acts 7, right at the beginning of Acts 8 is when Saul was persecuting the church, and then all of them had to flee Jerusalem. So yeah, that I think that's pretty severe, obviously, for Stephen, for sure, and the rest of them fleeing.
There's some pretty good Old Testament examples. I was thinking of Daniel in the lion's den, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the burning fiery furnace. Men who were determined to be faithful to God and were persecuted because of it. And in both those instances, God delivered them. But they were willing to, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, we're not going to bow down to your idol. And we don't care what you do. You can do whatever you want to, but we're not bowing down to that idol.
Yeah, Paul faced angry mobs, and he was beaten and stoned.
Anybody else think of good Bible examples? You can say, I think you can honestly say, you could go all the way back to Abel in Genesis. Cain killed Abel because Abel did the right thing.
Yeah.
So really the history of humankind is just completely packed full of examples. People trying to do the right thing and other people persecuting them because they did.
Yeah. So you got that?
Sue?
John the Baptist beheading.
John the Baptist, because he told Herod, you shouldn't be married to that woman. Yeah, he told the truth and he got his head cut off for it. Good example. There are just tons of them. So let's go to 2 Timothy 3, verse 12. We've kind of hinted at this, but here is this truth plainly stated. 2 Timothy 3, verse 12 says, yea, and all that will live godly in Christ Jesus shall suffer persecution. You gotta emphasize that last phrase, shall suffer. It didn't say all who live godly in Christ Jesus might suffer persecution. It says we will. And so, actually, I believe that this verse potentially serves as a pretty good self-test. Have I ever been put upon in whatever way? I mean, I have not been put in jail. I have not been thrown in the lion's den. I haven't been put in the burning fiery furnace. Nobody has thrown stones at me. But have I, at any level, have I ever paid a price for being faithful to the Lord? Have people talked badly about me? Maybe I missed a promotion at work because I determined to go to church on Wednesday night. Those are the kind of things that are more likely going to impact us, But it's a pretty fair self-test. Have I ever paid a price of any kind for being a faithful Christian? And if I haven't, then this verse actually serves as sort of a warning. He didn't say you might be persecuted if you're living godly in Christ. He said you will be persecuted if you are living godly in Christ Jesus. So we can use that as a test. Again, I think the kind of persecutions that we list would not compare to the Apostle Paul or any of those others we just mentioned, but I think we ought to be able to put our finger on some instances in our lives where other people cast off on us and maybe just verbally, maybe just in the way they treated us. But we ought to be able to have some identification with something that happened because of the stand we were taking for God's truth.
It's got to happen naturally eventually. Yeah. I mean, the world's moving one way and we're totally opposite. Eventually there's got to be some kind of at odds, I mean, it's just going to happen.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
The Bible's absolutely true.
Yeah. Anybody? Thoughts or comments? Go ahead, Josh.
All right, so number 6, it said, what are some of the persecutions faced by Christians of our day? So as I was looking through this, I'm thinking about us here in America, and we've got some things that we deal with, but I was thinking that things aren't, they're not so bad here, honestly. So I did some research. Now, so I'll throw you some things. I won't spend too much time, but just know that in this research, when it says Christians, they may not be members of the Lord's church, but I just looked at some things worldwide today. And this is from, where'd I get this at? DailySignal.com. It says North Korea is the most dangerous place in the world for Christians today. If a person's Christian faith is discovered, he or she is killed on the spot or shipped to a labor camp where chances of survival are slim. China, obviously, it sees Christianity as a threat to the Chinese Communist Party's power. I read that they have to They closed last year, I think, 10,000 churches or meeting places. They were underground house churches. But if they're state-sanctioned churches, they're required to display signs that read, "Love the Communist Party, love the country, love the religion." I thought that was interesting. It's got some statistics about Asia. 2 in 5 people that identify as Christians are persecuted for their faith. I read in Nigeria, nearly 5,000 people who said they were Christians were killed for their faith. So there is persecution going on in the world today. There's people that literally today, if they are found out to be a Christian, will be killed immediately or sent, like it said in North Korea, sent to some kind of camp to be enslaved. So that kind of, I don't know, it kind of opens my eyes a bit. People are persecuted in the world. And I think about our situation and think, well, I've just got hardly nothing to deal with.
Like the guy said, we're drowning in a tub of butter.
Yeah, I'm going to use that quote too. I like that. But yeah, I think you're right. Mostly what we have to deal with today is our politically correct culture. We've got this idea of people that being woke, and if you're not woke and up to date on political correctness, then you may be canceled. We've got cancel culture.
Yeah.
And so maybe that's.
But that's real. That's still real
is.
persecution.
It is.
It's a different kind. We're going to talk about in the next question. There's 2 different kinds of persecution. But I do think that probably if we went around the room, most all of us could relate instances where somebody attacked us for our faith. Sometimes it's family. Sometimes it's people of the world that we live around. Sometimes it's brethren. But all of us could probably talk about times where people came at us because we were trying to live faithfully to the Lord. And so there are persecutions. Right. Yeah. Not always the physical ones, but there are persecutions.
Yeah, pretty minor. At work last week, we had our big sales meeting. And so people, it's worldly people, right? So after meetings, they want to go out and have a drink. So people say, "Josh, you want to come have a drink with us?" And I say, "No, I don't drink." And so people say, "What, are you a recovering alcoholic? Because you don't drink?" "No, I just don't drink."
You know what's sad is that if you had said yes, then they probably would have respected you. But because you said, "I don't drink because I'm a Christian," then they want to put off on you.
We drink. That's what we do. We go out and we're going to have a good time after this meeting. And you don't. It's like, what kind of weirdo are you? Where are you from? Because you don't do it. Yeah, I'm a teetotaler. Yeah. So, those are, I guess, those are persecutions that we deal with.
Okay. Anybody? Thoughts, Karen?
I'm sure just about everyone is familiar with the case in Colorado of the cake baker and how he refused to make a cake for a couple that
Homosexual wedding, yeah.
And I think he won one victory and then lost another one. But he's been battling this for years, and this affects his career, his life.
Who would have thought just because you're a baker, they're going to come at you because you won't bake a cake for a homosexual wedding? But that's the world we're in, for sure. And I think, I'm not a prophet, but I think it's going to get worse. All indications are that sort of thing is going to accelerate. And like I think Gordon said a little bit ago, I don't think that it's too far down the road, too far off in the future, when they will come at us for hate speech. If we preach against homosexuality, abortion, any of those kind of moral issues, and we're going to preach them. We have to preach. It's part of the whole counsel of God. We have to preach the whole counsel of God, and when we preach them, I think the indications are we will pay a price for that. All right. The author said something in the next question. It kind of made me wonder. He says, what is there about emotional and mental persecution that in some ways makes it as severe a trial of faith as bodily persecution? I'm not sure I agree with that statement. That what we've been talking about, we face emotional and mental persecutions, but he's suggesting that can be as much a trial of faith as bodily persecution. I don't know if I agree with that premise. I don't tell you if they were going to throw you in a lion's den. I think that'd be harder to deal with than someone making fun of you last week, Josh, because you wouldn't drink alcohol.
Yeah.
I mean, what you faced was a form of persecution. But I don't think it's on the same chart as, being thrown in the lion's den.
Right. No, I agree with you. I agree.
So I don't know about that. Clayton.
The lion's den example, I mean, no one wants to go through that, but it's probably going to be over pretty quick. Think of what if you were sitting in jail for a month, knowing you're about to go into the lion's den in a month, or knowing that your brethren are about to be thrown in. That's the emotional toil that I think could possibly be worse than that.
So I see what you're saying. I think it's a fair point. So we're not going to throw you in the lion's den, but you're fired, and we're going to blackball you. You will not work again, and how are you going to feed your family? So maybe it's not physical persecution, but it could be very hard kind of things to deal with. A good point. I think that's a fair point. Wade?
So I've got patients that I see that come in with just depression, anxiety, PTSD, all kinds of mental problems. And those problems are real. And those problems, although those patients may not have physical problems, but those mental problems affect them as much as the physical problems do. And they can lead to physical maladies.
Yeah. Good point. Good point. Anybody else?
I thought about Moses in Numbers 11:14. It says, I'm not able to bear all this people alone because it's too heavy for me. And if thou deal thus with me, kill me, I pray thee, out of hand, if I have found favor in thy sight, and let me not see my wretchedness. Moses had got this idea that life just become too difficult to live. And I think he just go ahead and just kill me and get me, because this is too much for me to bear and too much for me to deal with. And I think sometimes our feelings can get to a point where we feel that way. Life is just too difficult, and so it's nobody's threatening my life, but my thoughts and my emotions and things like that. Elijah got overwhelmed that way. So yeah, it is a very real thing, but it is different from physical bodily type persecution for sure.
All right. Anybody else? Take us number 8, Joe.
Okay, number 8 says, there are reasons to believe that Christians who stand for the truth will face greater persecution in days ahead. What would lead to this conclusion? And in answering this question, think back to your answer to question 3. So what do you think about that? Reason to believe that in the future we'll face greater persecution. My first thought when reading this was, I suppose, don't you think that people have always felt that way, like it's going to continue to get worse? Although there are a lot of warning signs that show us that we feel like it's going to continue to get worse, especially in our country. But we've always enjoyed a peaceful existence. But God, it can almost only get worse. Well, that's true.
Because we've had it so relatively easy that if it moves at all, it's almost got to move in the direction of harsher persecution.
But God never promised this carefree, perfect type existence. And so when it said, think back to your answer to question 3, remember that was where we read about Jesus saying,
they hated me, they hate you.
Yeah, they don't know God, and so you're going to be opposing their cause, and that's going to happen to you as well.
Yeah. Matt?
It's kind of funny, we don't realize how fast it can come, or even maybe from what direction it'll come. Because that which first begun to take the Christians and their rights, the Romans, they stood under the Roman law and declared their rights, and they had rights. Well, then those rights were quickly taken away from them, and the Romans become the persecutors of the Christians.
Yeah.
So
Things can change in an instant. I think you're right. And so that really behooves us to be prepared. Be prepared, because as Matt says, it can change in a hurry. Look at a couple of passages that talk about the attitude of this. We already talked some about this, but go to Matthew 5, Sermon on the Mount, in the Beatitudes. Matthew 5, verse 10. Matthew 5, verse 10. Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For so persecuted they the prophets which were before you. So Jesus, again, I think he speaks to idea that we can expect it. Do not be surprised when it comes. It will happen. He didn't say in verse 11, blessed are you if men shall revile you. He said, blessed are you when men shall revile you and persecute you, say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. So Jesus is basically telling you it's coming. Be expecting it. But he says we can even react to that. Surprisingly, in verse 12, rejoice, be exceeding glad. Why? Facing those kind of hardships, why would I be rejoicing about that? Because great is your reward in heaven. That's not going to, if you stand true and faithful, God knows that. He knows anything that might be put upon us, any suffering that we do for His cause, whatever kind it is, however it comes, God is aware, and He will reward you for that. You be faithful in the face of that persecution, He will reward you. So one of the things we got to do when we're facing that, again, keep our eye on the goal of heaven. This world is not my home. I'm just a passing through. This is not forever. This is just temporary. Heaven's forever. I got to keep that in mind. But I always have liked the last part of that too. For so persecuted they the prophets which were before you. You're in good company. If you suffer persecution for God, you're in great company with all the great heroes of faith, all the Old Testament prophets who suffered harsh things. He said, if you endure that, you are like them. You're in really, and so I always kind of thought, man, that puts you in good company. I don't feel like I deserve to be in the same company with Elijah, but if I suffer persecution and endure it, Jesus said, I'm like him, right? That's a good thing.
Yeah. Well, Sunday you talked about Jesus and all the things that he suffered through. I mean, he's the one saying these words. He faced all these trials and all these tests and went through, mocking and being put on fake trial and then crucified. But he did all that because of the end result. He was able to go through that because of the end result. And I think he's a perfect example, obviously, for that.
Exactly right. Anybody? Let's skip that other part of that and go to number 10, Josh. Let's wrap. We're just out of time.
All right. Number 10 says, consider Romans 8:18 and 2 Corinthians 4:17. Let's go to 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and read verse 17. Those two verses say just about the same thing. But 2 Corinthians 4:17, it says, for our light affliction, which is but for a moment, worketh for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. And so it says what assurance is contained in these verses to help us through our persecution. Paul compares afflictions, and he says they're light, but for a moment. So he says they're very minimal, they're very brief, but that makes way for more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. I mean, he kind of compares what we're dealing with now and then what the end result would be. I put some time into thinking about that. It's sort of puzzling because we know what it's like right now. I know what I'm dealing with right now, and I haven't seen what heaven's going to be like. I don't know what it's almost like this future kind of dream that I can dream about, but I know what it's like here and now. And so it's kind of puzzling when you think about what Paul said.
Well, I think the next verse goes to that idea, Josh.
Yeah.
Verse 8, while we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal.
Yeah, we almost have to just know it in our mind that I can see this.
This is not, however bad this is, it's not forever.
Yeah, and I think that's something we have to wrestle with in our mind.
Yeah, exactly right. Anybody have a thought or comment here? Look, we got a minute. Let's look at that other verse in Romans 8. Romans 8, verse 18. Paul says, I reckon that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. That goes right to what we were saying. Yeah. The comparison here between what heaven will be like and what we're expected. This is just a brief instant compared to all of eternity in heaven.
Right. I agree. Once we get in that situation, I don't think we'll be even concerned at all about the here and now. But right now, this is all we know.
Yeah. And that's what makes it a little bit harder, yeah.
Go ahead. Do you have thought?
I was going to say, the end of the verse there said, far beyond all comparison.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're not even on the same chart.
Right.
Exactly right. Exactly right. All right, everybody, good comments. We're out of time. Next week's lesson, Lord willing, is something we've got to deal with that can really test our faith, and that is worldly surroundings. Worldly surroundings, testing our faith. And we'll look at that next week, Lord willing. Thanks, everybody.